First up, Dr. Greg Brown, who is a history professor at UNLV. He received his PhD in European history from Columbia University in 1997, and at UNLV has worn many hats. Special assistant to the executive vice provost for strategic planning. Can anyone repeat that? I didn't think so. Vice provost for faculty policy and research, and chair of the faculty senate. And most recently, Greg helped found the Jewish faculty and staff group at UNLV in response to the October 7th attacks on Israel. It's the first Jewish affinity group on campus. Clayton Greb is a congregation near Tamid Religious School alumnus, yes. And the son of CNT members Janice and Mark, yay. At CNT, he was a madrich, assisting and teaching the 4th grade. He's now a college student at the University of Nevada, Reno, and he attended the March for Israel on Tuesday, November 14th, 2023 in Washington, D.C., along with 290,000 of his best friends. Largest pro-Israel gathering in U.S. history. Look where we have come. And Clayton has now very also involved as, I think you're the president of Chabad, also known as Chabad. All right, very good. We're very proud of you, Clayton. We'll get the UNR. And Jolie, they didn't give me your resume. It was too long. I don't know. We're going to have to talk to that office. But we all know Jolie. We're very proud of her. And she, of course, is the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League, and she has gotten right in the thick of things when it's come to anti-Semitism in the state, and especially at the college campuses. So we're going to invite all three of you to come on up. So it's been quite a whirlwind of events. We had October 7th, and what, to me, struck me, and probably a lot of people, is almost immediately following October 7th, things started popping up. It was almost perhaps as if it was planned, and you can comment on that. And where did that start? Was it organic? Was it something from the outside introduced to campus life? And this may not be UNLV just yet, but right from the start. So I'm going to turn to Jolie just because you kind of have the national perspective on this.
So that's a really great question. And from the moment that October 7th happened, we saw a rise of, we saw just anti-Semitism skyrocket, right? It's like the sewer lid was raised off, and there was just no way to put it back on. And so, I mean, it's an interesting question of like, where did it start? We need more time to really kind of go into how we got to where we are, though. It's not, I don't think anybody's surprised by what we're seeing today, which is, very sad. We're sad, but not surprised.
So I have a timeline here. October 8th, over 30 Harvard University student groups led by Harvard's Palestine Solidarity Committee co-signed a letter saying that they hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence. That's October 8th, right? Over the next week, tensions are high on Harvard's campus. A bus is driven around campus showing the names and faces of students who are part of the groups that signed the letter under a banner reading Harvard's leading anti-Semites. October 10th, a New York University law student releases a statement in an internal newsletter that says, in part, Israel bears full responsibility. He had a job offer that was rescinded. So we see a lot of activity in Harvard, and then before you know it, it begins to spread to some other Ivy League schools. And without rehashing what we saw unfold, Greg, how did it get to UNLV, and how early did it get to UNLV?
So the chronology, I think, for our campus was a few days after. It was the Thursday following, which would have been the 11th, I think. There was a vigil that students organized that was really beautiful, but there was...
Was it for the Israelis who were killed, or...
Yes.
Wasn't for pro-Palestinian?
No. It was a vigil for Israelis who had been killed in the attacks, It was a really beautiful thing, but the point I was going to make was there was only one person from the university administration who came, kind of not in an official capacity. And I think that one of the things that that sort of did, and we had a message from the president about the same time, it set it in a context that did not allow people to understand this as a terrorist attack or as an atrocity. The president's letter to the campus said something to the effect of, I can't pretend to understand the complexities of this issue, right? There's no war at this point. And I do think that there's 2 points I would make underlying this, sort of broadly. One is something that I'm sure Jolie can speak to much greater detail about, which is this is not organic, right? That there were and are large organizations in this country, going back decades, whose mission is to undermine the credibility and sovereignty of the state of Israel, and they were, I think, very prepared, and I think some of the examples you cited. But where that's not necessarily present, I think you also had a lot of people, and I would say in the case of UNLV, our senior administration, who really had no experience with the Jewish community or with the Israeli students or faculty. There had not been historically a lot of outreach to the student groups, which have been very active for years, but the senior administration had not been involved. And I think, therefore, the extent to which this was something that people experienced as a very personal attack, whether it was because they had family in Israel or were Israeli or simply had emotional connections, was not appreciated. And in that sense, I think, therefore, sort of from the beginning, there was, if not overt anti-Semitism at UNLV, there was a lack of empathy, which is sort of the first step in that direction. Now, the students experienced, told by them, sort of harassment really within that first week. But I think
But that first week, we're still on the page of
October 7th to...
Yeah, being kind of empathetic to the Israelis, right?
That's right.
All right. So I guess my question is, when do you think it turned? Was it all focused on, quote, the death of civilians and people wanting parity? When did the narrative switch and Israel become the villain? Was it influenced by what was going on in other college campuses, or was it organic? And Clayton, I want you to think about what also happened at UNR.
So I think that the general feeling, and some of the students who are here, and maybe afterwards people can speak to them, but there was, I think, a strong sense of not wanting to engage in too much of a public dialogue because of this just plain lack of familiarity with the issue. Lack of familiarity. On our campus, just as an example, over the course of several years, when there were attacks on various communities in other cities and other places quite far away, hate crimes in Atlanta, Georgia against Asian Americans, or forest fires in Hawaii, the university made statements of empathy and support. And in this case, there was none. And I think part of that had to do with a lack of recognition of the way in which this was experienced as a very personal attack. When we start to see what I personally became very involved in, it really was in the winter and the spring, and we had this incident on February 27th with the Israeli speaker. But I think that, as it were, the environment was such whereby the leadership had not reached out, had not made statements, and had not allowed people to see this as a tragedy and an atrocity that was going to have very deeply personal consequences for Israelis on campus and for Jewish people.
Okay. Clayton, what was going on at UNR? Just the very beginning now, the first month. Do you remember?
Yeah, so at UNR, that first Monday, me and then the Chabad rabbi, we tabled in front of our student union that Monday, and we were really fortunate to run into a bunch of higher administration. So we ran into the president of the university, the dean of a few colleges who I was familiar with.
So this was by coincidence?
By coincidence, they just happened to be walking in and out of the student union. And so they kind of approached us and they were like, we don't know what's going on. What can we do to help? So that first Monday, we set up meetings for the end of the week to meet with higher administration to see what was happening. And we also organized a candlelight vigil. I can't remember if it was on Wednesday or Thursday night, but we did a candlelight vigil. And the vigil went really well. We had a pretty big turnout of students and also community members up in Reno. And then that Friday, we met with the president of the university, and he posted something on Instagram. And at the end of the meeting, I was like, you should also meet with the Muslim student group. And after that, the next week, the Muslim student group organized a huge pro-Palestine rally that was filled with hate. And we had to go then meet with the president of the university again and report all the things that were wrong. And luckily at UNR, the student groups were a lot more they worked with us a lot more, because we told like the president, here's some things that just can't be said. Like, this is just overtly anti-Semitic, like this is hate speech. And then he communicated that back to them. And so that student group was like kind of stopped with their like spreading of hate, but then other groups not affiliated with the school in any way started holding their own protests on campus.
And so were they stopped, though, the ones who were not part of the campus?
So the ones who weren't part of campus, probably like once a month, have organized rallies or protests, and there's not much the university could really do about that. So like, I know the police chief pretty well at UNR, and he's kind of like, unless they start really saying something calling for violence or attacking like you as a person, they're kind of just allowed to be on campus.
Okay. And you said there was a lot of hate speech. So what would you have thought? River to the sea kind of stuff?
Yeah,
or?
so river to the sea, and then a lot of just like blood libel and stuff like that on their big signs, and no really facts to support anything, just spewing hate towards Israel and like the Jewish people as a whole.
It was to the Jewish people as a whole?
Yeah.
It wasn't just towards Israel?
In my opinion, like, hate towards Israel is to all the Jews.
Right.
So when you're attacking Israel and only blaming, like, not talking about other things, then it's pretty one-sided. You know where these people stand.
Yeah. So I want to have Jolie kind of amplify that, because I know when ADL first, for a long time, really, they did their annual statistics of hate crimes, and then they broadened it to include, anti-Zionist statements, and that was important in lieu of what happened. But so tell us a little bit about that, but also what's the balance between, quote, free speech and hate speech, and how are we allowed to somehow regulate it on a college campus when people say, well, it's free speech?
Right. So since 1979, the ADL has been conducting an audit of anti-Semitic incidents across the country. And in that audit, we found, we were looking at incidents of anti-Semitism. This past year, ADL, with the rise that we have seen, we made a statement saying, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. To believe that the Jews don't have a right to, or that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself is anti-Semitic for multiple reasons, right? We can go into all those. This year, for our audit, we had an increase of 140%. That is one incident happening every hour. Now remember, these are before October 7th. So since October 7th, we've seen on college campuses an over 1,000% increase of incidents taking place. And I just really want to take a second with when President Sandoval actually went and spoke to the Muslim students, and he said, this is what River to the Sea means, and they actually stopped chanting that. Is that correct? For a while, until outside.
That organization stopped doing it because they were threatened to get kicked off campus. But basically, those same people who were a part of that organization just joined another organization that wasn't affiliated with UNR in any capacity, so they kind of were able to do what they
But
wanted.
that's a great example.
So Sandoval threatened to kick him off? Is that what happened?
More or less.
Yeah.
Like, in broad terms. But
Okay.
like,
Unacceptable.
Since they're officially associated with UNR, like how like Chabad of UNR is associated with UNR, as like a campus organization, you can't be doing certain things.
Yeah, so it's a student organization on campus. And so Sandoval said, if you're going to have this hate speech, right, which is, we can criticize the state of Israel, right, but when it starts to go into threats against Jews, that is when hate speech becomes is not protected anymore. And so, this is part of the conversation that we've been having, but I think that that's a great example of how a university president has been able to like be proactive versus maybe what we've been seeing at UNLV, where the president has been completely silent.
Yeah, so that's something, President Sandoval has probably met with us once a month at least since October 7th. And at the end, I always joke with him and say, oh, like, what is President Whitfield gonna do? I was like, probably not this. And every time we're like, always like, I'm like, oh, thank you so much. Like, you're setting a great example. If only UNLV could follow the same thing. Because I have a ton of friends at UNLV. And like, I always like send them, like before, I'd be like, oh, I'm meeting with like President Sandoval. Like, is there anything specific you want me to ask? Like, I could relay a message. And they're like, could you please tell like our president to meet with us? And it basically just never happens.
Great.
So Jolie, if you're comfortable, and Greg, if you're comfortable, speak to some of the silence that Clayton's alluding to. I know you've met with him a couple times, and you've even spoken truth to power in pretty strong terms. I don't know if it made a difference.
So I think there's a couple different things. I mean, I think first of all, administrators generally, I mean, and I think in some ways Sandoval, because he has a background in public service, might be a little bit different from this, generally take meetings either to solve problems or to placate. And I think that this one is one where at the level of the president, there wasn't a strong sense that they could solve the problem because he didn't really understand what the problem was. So most of the meetings were meetings that would be in the category of trying to placate. There was an early meeting with the students, which led to no action at all. The primary request that was made was to simply make a communication of the sort that I alluded to earlier, to say, like, this is a source of concern for our community, there's support resources, to call attention to the emotional needs for safety and security that members of our community have. And the unwillingness to do that was and remains sort of frustrating. One reason we were given was about the First Amendment, which First Amendment's important, and we could talk about it in great detail. It was never clear to me what that was in relation to our request that he, for instance, make a statement. So I think that a lot of this has to do with the difference between someone viewing themselves primarily from the standpoint of sort of a public servant who has a responsibility to the community and somebody who is largely trying to move things from the inbox to the outbox or the other way around. I think that there really has been a lack of drive. One of the things we've been pushing for, and this is really, I'll say what we've been asking for and then I'll talk about the importance of the community support, is to establish some kind of working group or task force on Jewish identity and inclusion. Because the president doesn't have anyone in his office that he talks to regularly who's from our community. And that's a rarity on a college campus. UNLV is a little bit of an anomaly in that the Jewish community is much more represented in the community than on campus. Often it's the reverse. But to have some people that he would talk to regularly, the way that perhaps President Sandoval's met with the students, just to get a feel of what's important to you. Explain this issue to me from your perspective. Explain to me why you felt it was important to have a vigil on October 11th, or why speech calling for the dismantlement of Israel is to you something you experience as hate speech. I just don't think those questions are ones that he's been willing to ask, and this has been a source of great frustration. There are people within the administration, one of them is here tonight, who really have. We've been very fortunate to have a few people who came into their roles, including Vice President for Diversity, and can I say my name? Yeah. Okay. Diana Morena Cantino, who started as the Associate Vice President for Student Life at the beginning of the year. And these were people who I think in part because they had worked more broadly in public engagement, community engagement, were used to working with Jewish communities in other jobs or in other parts of their professional lives, and also just because they were good people, really did want to hear from our community and really did want to try and find out what are the things that are important to you. It has been a lot of work, a tremendous amount of unnecessary effort, I think, just to get to the point that we can say, we'd really like you to hear what's important to us. And a lot of the effort that we have made, I think if Rob is here, the work that we did in getting help to build this faculty and staff group had to be put into dealing with the very difficult environment that we started to encounter beginning at the end of February, which was when this particular student activist group shut down an Israeli speaker, a scientist, and after that became somewhat emboldened because they were told by the university, or at least they felt they'd been told by the university, this was within their free speech rights to do, so that we've had a series of incidents that have been attempts to sort of disrupt academic activity.
And just for the audience, kind of fill them in just
Sure.
real quick, what happened with that? There was a visiting Israeli
So we had a visiting
professor.
Israeli scientist, Asaf Be'er from Bar Ilan University, was giving a lecture on the very cool and generally uncontroversial topic of how you use, it had to do with black holes, and he explained it to me.
Nothing to do with Gaza,
Science.
nothing to do with the war.
But it was shut down by a group of 6 people, at least 3 of whom were UNLV students, from a particular student club, then known as Nevadans for Palestine Liberation, now known as Students for Justice in Palestine. And their attacks on him were very personal. They knew his hometown, and they shut it down. They just shut down the event. The police, who were very much, and for UNLV, the big event of the year from the administration standpoint has largely been the shooting in December, wanted to just ensure safety. So the police officer who came stopped the event. We don't know exactly what they were instructed to do, but their view was that was the safest thing to do. In the course of doing that, the police officer told the speaker, this is their First Amendment right, and that got reported in the newspaper. The university never put out a formal statement of what had happened, what the policies were. There was some degree of internal communication to clarify from the provost, but no formal statement. So that the takeaway was that it was within their First Amendment rights to shut down this speech. And that really began a period of time where we've seen an awful lot of transgressive and deliberately disruptive activity.
So I don't want to belabor it, but this comes up so much. So why is it not within their First Amendment rights to do hate speech?
So in that case, it's not about the content of the speech at all. It's about what the lawyers here would call the time, place, and manner, right? Is this the right time? Is this a place? And is this an appropriate way? It had nothing to do with the content of the speech. It was shouting down the lecturer, right? In other words, if someone got up now and said, Rabbi Akselrad's the best ever, and kept screaming, you would still ask them to leave no matter what nice things they were saying about you, because it's just plain against our policies about how we run services. We have explicit written statements about how we run classes or how we run events at the university. They were not enforced in that instance. It was not even about the hate speech. There's a point I want to make here, and maybe if you want to talk about hate speech, but that is that a lot of what has happened in a positive direction, a lot of that has happened because of community support. It happened due to support from the ADL, it happened due to support from Jewish Nevada and from their people who support Hillel and the other student organizations. It happened because of a tremendous amount of support from people in this congregation. Our group really started here. There were a lot of people who came to events on campus just to show their support. And precisely because, in our case, I think, some members of the university administration are really reticent and don't have ties to the community the way that President Sandoval does up in Reno. That community involvement is tremendously important. The president and others have to hear from the community that this is something of importance for our campus and for our city.
So Clayton, let's move a little bit further along the timeline. At UNR, did things get worse? Did that just kind of calm it down? Did you end up with tents and encampments and all that at UNR?
So we were really lucky at UNR. We didn't have anything extreme. We just had these little silly rallies. And like the Jewish community up there is much smaller than down here, but we have a much better connection with campus. So like every time there was one of these like protests, and like the page that runs it, like some Instagram page, like I'm blocked, almost every Jewish student at UNR is blocked, the Chabad Instagram's blocked, the Hillel Instagram's blocked. So it's kind of like a surprise to us if like we see this, but like the police chief will like shoot me over an email, be like, hey, I saw this on Instagram, like just to let you know, like this is what's happening this day. Or like President Sandoval will be like, I've heard rumors that there was supposed to be this protest on this day, like I'm not sure, and then it happens, and then we'll have a meeting about it, and he'll kind of just be like, how do you, like, the Jewish students feel on campus? And like the police chief will be there, and the president of the university, the vice president of the university. And so we have those people who are like actively reaching out and listening to us, which makes it just infinitely better than at UNLV.
Yeah, when you look at, compare and contrast, I see maybe Jolie's got a knowing smile. It just shows you the art of the possible. And I think that's important because sometimes I put myself in the shoes of, say, Whitfield, and I go, well, what would I do? I'm trying to be even-handed, and I'm trying to make sure the Palestinians, aren't upset. I'm trying to make sure the Jews aren't upset, and I don't draw a line. But yet there is a way to be empathetic and compassionate to everybody, but yet teach all the students what hate speech is about and what's unacceptable. And that's a lesson we hope that someone will understand by the time they're done going through college, right?
Yeah, and it's helped that over the past, I've just finished my third year of college, that since I've been there the past 3 years, we already had these relationships built up. So every Rosh
So that's
Hashanah, we
important.
brought President Sandoval a little gift basket with a honey cake and a challah, and every Hanukkah we bring a bunch of donuts to the police department there. And so we already
So
had.
who came up with that? That's interesting. Who came up with that? It's just part of what you guys do?
I can't take all the credit, but so we've done these things throughout years. We already had.
All right,
these
Joel, we got to
connections
start
and-
sending a honey cake over to
So
Whitfield.
they're always excited when they see us because we always every time we meet with Sandoval, we always bring a challah or
But the point is, the
hamantasha.
relationship was there before
Yeah.
bad stuff happened. That's important.
And if I could just add to that, on October 7th, right, that was a Saturday, October 8th, I was in contact with President Sandoval, and I had a great conversation with him about a statement coming out, and I was also in contact with President Whitfield, and those conversations were very different in the understanding of the importance of protecting all students and making sure that we create a safe and inclusive learning environment for every student on campus. And Sandoval's done a
Yeah, and with Sandoval, when he releases statements now, he sends it to the Chabad rabbi, and he's just hey, give me a thumbs up.
He also on, trying to create this safe and inclusive space when we had Jewish Heritage Month, right, which was in May. Sandoval did a really beautiful statement, really uplifting that. And we, those are just some really nice best practices, and we have shared some of those with the UNLV administration as well.
One point I'd like to make, I do think that my personal concern is much less with what is or is not hate speech, in the sense that, and I think this is partly my theory about where certain people in positions of authority at UNLV are, it's just much more about a lack of an interest in understanding the issue or in making this a teachable moment. Like I said, the thing that aggravated me more than anything was this statement from the president that I cannot pretend to understand the complexities of this issue. Yes, you can. You're the president of the university. You have a history department, a political science department. You have a lot of people that could help you understand that. We've been working all year to just try and get to the point that there can be some university-supported education, because I think you mentioned earlier in your remarks, Rabbi, well, do the students really understand what they're saying? I talk to a lot of students. Perhaps you have a different opinion, but I would say that most of the students who have participated in what they consider to be pro-Palestinian demonstrations, what we often hear as anti-Israeli or even anti-Semitic demonstrations, don't really understand what they're saying. And part of that has to do with the lack of history education. Really, that a lot of our students, because we are very heavily a vocational university in terms of what students choose to study, they don't really know much world history. They don't. And therefore, they tend to pick it up from other sources. They pick it up from the student club they belong to. They pick it up from their student orientation and things like this. And I think, therefore, the frustration that I've had more than anything is not that people are saying stupid or even offensive things. It's the lack of the desire to say this is a really important moment for education.
So let me clarify one thing, because this comes up a lot. Well, the students don't know what they're talking about. They get it from their professors. Would you say that's fair, unfair? You hear that out there in the ether all the time. What's going on these college campuses? Their professors are filling them with anti-Semitic rhetoric. Clayton, Greg, Jolie, anyone want to respond?
Could I go first? Because it's a faculty question.
Professor.
So, I think that students learn the experience of college is a learning experience. You learn from a lot of different environments. They may or may not learn it from their professors, but not necessarily in the classroom, right? So that talking to someone in a position of authority or responsibility is when they learn, regardless of whether or not that person is actually teaching them a class. I don't think that the faculty, and certainly not at UNLV, are any more or less engaged on this particular issue. That might be different at other universities. But I do think that there have been individuals among my colleagues who have really tried to make a lot of statements without necessarily speaking within areas that they have much academic expertise. Therefore, the answer is yes, I do think that there are some members of the faculty who have been not constructive in terms of making this a teachable moment, but that's not happening in the classroom. It's not because the faculty are indoctrinating them so much as. Now, I'll give you a quick example of how I think this can work alternatively. And that is, first of all, we have had, in this sense, a really amazing experience over the last 8 months because of the opportunity to come together, some of the faculty and staff, and to work with students, to work with Rabbi Zvi at Chabad. And we really feel like there's a tremendous amount of positive impact we can make over time by creating much more of a community than we've had in the past for informal education. But that will also, we hope, lead to some formal education. I did teach a class on the history of Zionism this spring. It was a class that kind of got thrown up at the last minute because my other class didn't get enough students. So everybody who signed up for it was just put in by their advisors, which a lot of our first year students, that's what happens. But it was a great experience because the students were actually much more comfortable asking questions in a classroom environment than I think they were, in other environments. And so to the extent that, yes, there are people that are learning things that I think are bad history and sometimes learning it from colleagues, I do think that the more teaching we can actually do, my colleague who teaches Middle Eastern history teaches good Middle Eastern history, right? And in that sense, I think the issue is not so much indoctrination in the classroom so much as the lack of actual formal education.
Yeah, so I haven't taken a history class since my freshman year, but I know, at our university, the president, or the dean of my college, the dean of the College of Business, is a huge Zionist. So a lot of that stuff doesn't really fly in the classroom at UNR.
What about the opposite, pro-Israel rhetoric? Does that, either way, does it go?
The classes I've taken, I haven't noticed anything. I've never seen Israel mentioned in any of my history classes, which is crazy. I had modern history, which was the 1500s on, and there was no mention of any Jewish history, meaning no Holocaust, no Crusades.
We didn't get to 1948 even, right?
Yeah. But I know, in some of my management classes, we'll read a book, and of course it's written by a Jew, or it's written by an Israeli, or they're talking about some, theory that was developed in Israel. A lot of management theories currently modern were done by the IDF and some of their military training exercises. So a lot of that stuff is mentioned, but it's not really unless you're looking for it, you're probably going to read over it. And that also, most of the students don't even read the book. So I was one of the few who even noticed that. But
All right, I got maybe 2 more questions. So
Could I
Jolie,
just say
did you want to
something
add?
real quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that we have to remember in Nevada, I think we do have 2 opposites, right? Between, if we want to look at the administrations, right, between Whitfield and Sandoval and how active they have been. But I want to also put into perspective, where we are from the state of Nevada, right? When we look at other colleges, ADL did a report card of college campuses around the country on 85 different universities that had high levels of Jewish population. And there were only 2 A's in the entire report card. One was to, does anybody know? Brandeis University. Everyone's like, oh yeah, Brandeis. The second one was to Elon University. Never heard of it before, but it's a great place to send your kids if they're Jewish. So what we're experiencing in Nevada between UNLV and UNR and the education system is not what we're seeing around the country. I'm looking over at the Cohens, right? You have a student who went to Harvard University. I'm sure that they had a different experience than maybe what we've seen in our state. And so I think we do need to take some gratitude. We have to, sit here in a moment of like gratitude to where we are in the state of Nevada and versus what we see around the country and what we have seen with different professors, whether it be mandatory reading or having professors say that we'll give you extra credit if you go to this pro-Palestinian rally that's taking place on campus. We've been seeing all of this. And so in Nevada, we're not seeing that as much.
All right, well, I got that 2-minute warning. So I'll skip over the last question because there's a lot more that we could unpack. The commencement speech, the reaction after that, the meeting at the Regents where we had to, discuss the definition of anti-Semitism. That was, maybe during the ONEG you'll have a chance to do that, but there were a lot of people that joined you in advocating in front of the Regents to say this is the acceptable definition of anti-Semitism. Whitfield and Regents, you don't have to reinvent it. We already have something accepted by the federal government, by the state, but that seemed to be one big source of controversy and frustration. And there were other people that were called upon in the Jewish community at large and on campus who spoke up, and they are also mitzvah heroes. So the last thing I'm going to ask you is, what do you think is going to happen in the fall? More of the same, or it depends if the war is still going on, or what? Crystal ball.
I was going to answer a different question. I think that it's really hard to say what's going to happen in the fall, but I'll tell you what will happen in the fall that wasn't there when we started school last year, and that is the community that's been built. Some of the people, I can't see everybody because of the lights, but like some of the people that I've had the opportunity to work with, some of the people that have gotten involved with UNLV, like Heidi. I mean, I think that one of the things about UNLV more so than maybe Reno is the pretty wide disconnect between the university and the Jewish community in town, which has been, extremely well developed over many years, whereas on campus it really hasn't. And I think one of the goals we set in starting the group was to really build that relationship a little bit better. And I know a lot of people, do have a tie to the university. The general view of people is often, I just don't like UNLV. I think Jolie has said that to somebody. I've heard it repeated. I know. But
I did go to UNR. Go Wolfpack.
The point I'm going to make is engage, that there are real opportunities and there are teachable moments. Yair Rosenberg, who writes for The Tablet in magazine, wrote an article once that I really think of a lot. And he said, look, unless someone is actually attacking you, they may be saying anti-Semitic things, but treat it as a question. Treat it as an opportunity to teach, because there's so little opportunity for people to learn about Jewish culture and identity and inclusion unless somebody teaches it to them.
I do like UNLV. There's a lot of potential there. No, I think UNLV is a great campus. I think it's a great community. I think there's work to be done, the same way that I think at UNR as well. One of the things that I'm really hopeful for is that I see these students, right? And we have Brooke here, who's the president of Hallel, Clayton. There's a student, her name is Miriam. I went out to one of the pro-Israel rallies that took place, and I saw the conversations that students were trying to have with the pro-Palestinian students, and that made me very hopeful. I do want to leave on just one thing, is that it's important for us to remember that we can be pro-Palestinian, pro-Israel, and anti-Hamas. We can hold all those truths at the same time, and we can talk about these with the administration. If you went to college, if you have a student in college, if you have a student going to college, if you are in a community that has a university, like we all check these boxes, there is something that we can each and every one of us can do. We can be advocates, we can provide resources, we can go to the rallies that take place on campus, we can provide support to students, right? None of us are helpless in this. We don't turn on the television and say, oh my goodness, look what's happening at the university and there's nothing that we can do. We can do something. I look at Heidi. Heidi saw a problem, she wanted to find a solution. Each and every one of us in this room can be that positive activator of change.
So I'm more excited for the fall than anything because, like, kind of all of this is just kind of strengthened the Jewish community, meaning all these Jewish moms are now reaching out to the Jewish clubs on campus and being like, "Is my student going to be safe?" So I know like the Chabad rabbi and the Hillel director have gotten a bunch of text messages, emails, and whatnot, Instagram DMs from
I thought you were going to
moms.
say you get more Jewish swag or something.
Yeah. So the Jewish
Home-cooked
community,
meals.
Yeah.
exactly. So the Jewish community I know up in Reno is going to be a lot bigger than before because instead of us trying to find these Jewish students, their mom has already found us. So it's great.
That's right.
And then also like our director of admissions of UNR has like reached out to me and he has all the information for all the Jewish clubs and he's like, "Oh, I'll send it out. Make sure like if a Jewish student like emails me, like I'll make sure to get that information to them."
I love that. One last thing is that ADL, Jewish Nevada, and IAC, we have been working very closely as a community to provide resources to the university, to provide trainings on the American Jewish experience, to talk about anti-Semitism, to explain the IHRA definition and how it doesn't impede on freedom of speech. We're working as a community, and that should actually make everybody in this room feel really good to hear how our community is coming together in solidarity to provide more resources, not to overlap resources, and make us much stronger.
All right, let's hear it for our speakers, everyone.